We appreciate the presence of everyone this evening. Appreciate the opportunity to present another lesson from God's Word. Certainly, each time that I do this, it's a unique experience. I appreciate the opportunity, though. This evening, I thought we would talk some about our speech. So what does the Bible say about our speech, and what does our speech say about us? I want to read from I'll put my glasses on. I'm having a little hard time seeing up here. But I want to read from Proverbs, the 10th chapter, and verses 11 through 32. I'm not going to read it all, but there are several verses in here that talk about our speech, our mouth, our tongue, different things like that. And I just wanted kind of as a way to kick this off to read these verses. Verse 11, the mouth of the righteous is a well of life, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. Wisdom is found in the lips of him who has understanding, but a rod is for the back of him who is devoid of understanding. Wise people store up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. Verse 18, whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver. The heart of the wicked is worth little. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of wisdom. And then the mouth, verse 31, the mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked what is perverse. Our mouths can be used for good or evil. It's our choice and our responsibility. Our mouth is the means of our speech is directed by our mind, and therefore we can control our speech. We can control our tongue. In Matthew chapter 12, verses 36 and 37, it says, but I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So in this verse, I think this is one that we really should keep in mind as we think about these various avenues that we'll talk about tonight concerning speech. Because, if words are things that can result in our either being justified or our being condemned, then we know that they're pretty important. So does our speech put us in muddy water concerning, these different things that we're talking about here? So in Proverbs chapter 13, in verses 2 and 3, it says, a man shall eat well by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the unfaithful feeds on violence. He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lips shall have destruction. So how are we to guard our mouth? When we're thinking about that, we need to watch what is coming out of it for sure. Assure that it is guided by the precepts of the New Testament. In Matthew chapter 15, verses 10 and 11, it says, after Jesus called the crowd to him, he said to them, hear and understand, it is not what enters into the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth, this defiles the man. So what comes out of our mouth is a manifestation of what's going on with our thoughts. What are our words showing about our thoughts? In Proverbs 21 and verse 23, it says, "Whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles." Some versions on this particular verse use the word guard, but keepeth to me conveys a stronger sense. When you're thinking about the keeper of the sheep, it's not only trying to keep them from danger, but he's also responsible for feeding, that sort of thing. And so I think the idea of our keeping our tongue, has a lot more to do with it than just keeping it from danger. But it's also nourishing our minds to have the proper things coming out of it as well. So what is the proper use of the tongue? In Proverbs 15 and verse 23, it says, "A man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is." So by encouraging others, it's a service both to them and to us. It's kind of a multifaceted or two-way relationship. It's advantage to both sides. In Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 7, it says, "The lips of the wise disperse knowledge, but the heart of the fool does not do so." Our speech should be used, to help guide others, to admonish others to do right. What are the different ways that we can teach others directly? I think, a class, a conversation, a Bible study, there's a lot of different ways that we can teach others. And one of the things I considered talking about for this lesson tonight was on the different ways that we can fulfill our obligation to teach others. We don't have to stand up here like I'm doing tonight. We don't have to be a full-time preacher like Brother Hall is. There's a lot of things, a lot of ways that we can fulfill that obligation, but certainly those are some of the ways. But, when I think about our responsibilities toward teaching others, I think that one that all of us have is when we come in contact with people every day. Those people that others of this congregation or other congregation may never come in contact with. If at some point that we don't share the gospel with them, then they may not have an opportunity. So we all need to take advantage of that. And then I think we can all, you may not be comfortable with this. I think I've been doing this for 35 years and I'm still not comfortable with it. But it does serve a purpose to help encourage others when different ones teach, I think, because everyone has kind of a different method. Are we looking for our opportunities and trying to make those opportunities? We certainly need to be. In Proverbs 28 and 23, it says, "He who rebukes a man will find more favor afterward than he who flatters with the tongue." Our speech should be used to help others, to help pull them out of the fire, to help save them from sin. Flatterers mostly are looking out for themselves, and they're not helping with that. In Proverbs 15 and verse 1, it says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Our tone, our words, we can disarm anger with the right kind of words, with the right kind of attitude toward other people. And we need to be thinking in those terms from day to day, how we, we get caught in these situations. People are getting angry, and how do you diffuse that situation? We need to, or we want to think also about the constructive use of the tongue, and notice a few verses here concerning that. In Proverbs 15 and verse 26, it says, "The thoughts of the wicked are an abomination to the Lord, but the words of the pure are pleasant words." People can see a difference by our speech, what we're about. In Proverbs 16 and verse 13, "Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him that speaketh right." In Proverbs 22 and verse 11, it says, "He that loveth pureness of heart, for the grace of his lips, the king shall be his friend." In Proverbs 15 and verse 4, it says, "A wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness therein is a breach in the spirit." In Proverbs 10 and verse 11, it says, "The mouth of a righteous man is a well of life, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked." Again, we can see a distinction between, the way a righteous man would use his language, his speech, his mouth, and the way that's, the wicked would. In 16:24 Proverbs, "Pleasant words are as honeycomb, sweet to the soul and health to the bones." I was struck by the fact that, when this verse seems to be telling that, when we're using right words, they're not only pleasant, when you're dealing with somebody and they're trying to be kind or trying to be forthright with you or whatever, that's very pleasant to you to be treated rightly, but it's also a good thing for us, right? It's health to our bones. Then in Proverbs 25 verse 11, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver." Proverbs 10 and verse 20, "The tongue of the just is as choice silver. The heart of the wicked is little worth." And in verse 21, it says, "The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom." So how do we sin with our tongue? We've noticed some things that are good ways to use our tongue, things that we should be the ways that we should use our tongue. But what are some things that we are ways that we can use our tongue that's concerning or should be concerning to us? Well, certainly one of the ways is lying. We know about lying, and how that can cause problems. But the biggest problem with lying is the fact that God has prohibited it. It's a sin before God to do that. In Proverbs 16, verses 16 through 19, "These 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among the brethren." So in this list, lying was called out twice, just generic lying, and then a more specific kind of lying there when it talked about a false witness there later on. We can know that lying is also exposed. We will be exposed by lying. In Proverbs 12, verse 19, it says, "The truthful lip shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment." So we need to be careful and to be on our guard against fudging on the truth. That's kind of a difficult thing to do sometimes. Not that it's hard, but when somebody's not going to want to hear what you're saying, that's kind of difficult at times. So it'd be better to say nothing, though, right, than to tell a lie or even tell a white lie or whatever. So we need to be very careful about not using our tongue for lying. So the next thing that we want to look at is whispering and talebearing. In Proverbs 16, verse 28, it says, "A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends." The whisperer is condemned here by who he's associated with, a perverse man. We can do damage before we realize how grave a mistake this can be, whispering and talebearing, that is. In Proverbs 11, verse 13, it says, "A talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter." So a talebearer is not a faithful spirit. We see him contrasted here from a faithful spirit. So whisperers and talebearers are also known as gossipers, or that's another word that sometimes we use. I don't think the scriptures use that word necessarily, but we hear people talking about gossip, and we need to be very careful about that. If we know something that needs telling on a person, who should we usually tell it to? Probably the person that it's about. If it's important enough to be telling, or if it's, if you think there's an issue with that person, then we need to be talking to them. Do I participate in hearing tales, either true or false, and bearing them over to another person to tell? Each time each one of us talks to someone else about a third person, is it for the benefit of the third person, or is it just, gossiping? Is it because we got a grudge to grind against that third person? We need to be very careful that we, understand what our motive is if we're telling something on someone else or discussing an issue about someone else. Talking too much can be also an issue that, gets people in trouble. Proverbs 29 and verse 11, it says, "A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in till afterwards." So you see people sometimes that just talking all the time. And I'm not talking about to be friendly, but some people, as the old saying goes, seem to be continually looking for something they can hear and then spread. And we need to be very careful that we don't fall into that loop. So here in this situation, we see that the fool lacks discretion about what and when to speak. In Proverbs 2 and in verse 28, verse 2 says, "The tongue of the wise useth knowledge aright, but the mouths of fools poureth out foolishness." And then verse 28, "The heart of the righteous studieth to answer, but the mouth of the wicked poureth out evil things." So our speech needs to be appropriate. It needs to be, reasoned out and right in the balance. In Colossians chapter 4 and in verse 6, it says, "Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man." Again, don't just talk, but use discretion. So another one that the scriptures actually tells us about is about flattery. Now, generally, when we're talking about people doing flattery, they got some ulterior motive. They're trying to get something. They're trying to get in your favor, to get your business or to get you on their side or whatever. And we need to be very careful about those that would use flattery, and we need to be careful about using ourselves. But in Proverbs 28:23, it says, "He that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue." So one that stands on principle, one that would rebuke somebody that actually needed it, they're to be favored ahead of someone that would just flatter. 29:5 says, "A man flattereth his neighbor, a man that flattereth his neighbor spreadeth a net for his feet." So the imagery here is of being caught unsuspecting by someone that's laying that net. You've seen these things about wild animals and stuff that they put nets for, big animals, cats or tigers and lions and stuff that they catch in nets because they walk into an area that they don't realize there's a trap there. And so we need to also be concerned about people that flatter and make sure that we're not taken in by them. Another area that we need to be very careful about is profanity and suggestive language. It seems that, in the world that we live, that sort of thing is just getting worse and worse, because of all the stuff that's coming out of a lot of the movements that we know about going on this day and time. People just use any kind of language. They use it on TV, they use it wherever, and we need to be very concerned about that. And, one thing is sometimes if you're around somebody that's using language, especially if it's mild language, it may be a temptation to you at some point to start using euphemisms or, whatever like that. And I'm not necessarily putting euphemisms in this same category, but we need to be very careful about using language like that because people, we can hurt our example. In James chapter 3 and verse 10, "Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be." So have you ever seen a person that had a Bible on their desk and maybe a cross, wooden cross or something, so you know that they're trying to tell you that they're a religious person? Maybe they are, but yet they blurt out all this profanity and stuff just right and left and doing business and stuff. And I've seen some people like that when I was in the workforce, and it just seems like this great conflict between what they're doing and what they're showing, and it certainly is. So there are all kind of people out there that do stuff like that, and it's quite troubling. In Ephesians chapter 3, the latter part of the verse there, and then verse 4, it says, "Let it not be once named among you as becometh saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks." So we need to avoid filthy talk, questionable talk, and being caught up with a group that's telling things that they ought not be. We need to move away from those situations and avoid people that do that sort of thing. The next one that we want to notice is angry words. In Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 18, we read where it says, "A wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeases strife." So we don't need to return anger for anger. And, in 15:1 it says, "A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." So the wrong kind of words can do the opposite. They can cause problems, whereas if we have a soft answer or an answer that's, not, or trying to avoid making somebody even more angry than they are, then sometimes we can eliminate that problem. Another one that we want to notice is hurtful speech. In Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 18, it says, "There is it speaketh like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is health." If we're in a bad mood, we don't need to we do need to hold our tongue and not be hurtful toward others. Sometimes, you can just feel it. Somebody irritates you by what they're saying, and you kind of fly off the handle and say something hurtful to them. And it is kind of like the piercings of an arrow or piercings of a sword. And also on the other side, if we realize that someone else is in a bad mood, we don't need to crowd them. We don't need to do things that would antagonize them especially if you can tell that it's making them, moodier, making them jumpier, causing them to fall off the handle. We need to be very careful about that. So in concluding this lesson, in Proverbs chapter 16 verse 23, it says, "The heart of the wise teacheth his mouth, and addeth learning to his lips." So this is another proof that our mouth is the manifestation of our mind. Whatever is sowed in the heart will come out of the mouth. So we need to cultivate right thoughts in our heart so that we don't spew out these bad thoughts. In James chapter 3 and verse 8, it says, "But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison." You've seen sometimes where people talk about taming tigers, lions, and all kind of ferocious beasts like that, but they always say be very careful about those because they still have that wild instinct in them and they could attack you. And this verse is telling us that, the tongue, is worse than that, or can be worse than that. In Proverbs chapter 31, verse 26, this here is about the virtuous woman, of course. But it says, "She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is a law of kindness." As I mentioned, this was the virtuous woman, but do we aspire to be virtuous people? If we do, we need to do a good job with our thoughts and with our speech. If there's anyone here this evening who would need to render obedience to the gospel, you've learned that in times past, we would like to encourage you to do that. Or if there are those here this evening who have obeyed the gospel in times past, but you need to straighten out something in your life, we'd like to encourage you to do that at this time as we stand and sing.